Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Canucks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2, their third loss to the Canucks this season, third of 4 games, and so that maybe potential start to a winning streak that the Sharks had with the previous game against the Anaheim Ducks ends up not really leading to anything as they lose this one, and so they don't gain much ground in the standings at all, finding themselves still 9 points out of a playoff spot. So this game actually started off very well for the San Jose Sharks. In fact, they managed to get the first goal of this game rather early on, I would say, just the first few minutes. Tomas Hertl made it 1-0 San Jose. Quinn Hughes would eventually tie it up for the Canucks, but in the second period, Brent Burns would get the goal to make it 2-1. We would then go into the third period with that score, and for the first 40 minutes, the Sharks were by far the better team. They were playing some very, very good hockey. They were limiting what the Canucks could do. I believe the Canucks only had, a single shot, if I'm not mistaken, if that, in the last half of that second period. It was really all Sharks controlled, but unfortunately, especially when you consider the fact that after Hertl scored that goal, just a few minutes later, he would go down with injury and not return for the rest of the game. And when you obviously consider the fact that Couture is still out with injury, the Sharks don't necessarily have the offensive firepower to really capitalize on their dominance of the game, and so they only get that Brent Burns goal off of a rather lucky bounce, you could say, off of the leg of Tyler Myers, and so it's only a 1-goal lead that it's opened up in a pretty solid 40 minutes. Come third period, the Canucks start to fire back, and they fire back hard. They get goals from Tyler Myers, Virtanen, and Sutter within about a 5 or so minute span to turn a 2-1 lead from San Jose, a pretty precarious 1-goal lead, into a pretty convincing 2-goal lead for the Vancouver Canucks. They would eventually add an empty netter with Tanner Pearson's to make it 5-2, and the Sharks would end up losing a game that they had every right to win. And the first thing to talk about would be Martin Jones. In my previous review of the Ducks game, I said after that good performance from Aaron Dell that I would bet on the fact that Dell would get every game from here on out until he either has a bad game, even in a win, or he loses. But apparently I was wrong about that, as Martin Jones ended up getting the start here tonight, and he ends up performing not great. I mean, he wasn't awful. He did have a couple nice saves, one of them on an Elias Pettersson breakaway, but this Hughes goal, this Myers goal, this Virtanen goal, these are all goals from pretty far out, and while there were varying amounts of traffic in front, so these were not particularly easy saves, and I wouldn't blame a goaltender for giving up maybe one of these 3, but all 3 of them is just pretty unacceptable, especially when you look at the body of work that Jacob Markstrom on the Canucks side had to face and the amount of key saves he made for his team. It's just not a good game for Martin Jones, and I can't obviously say whether or not Aaron Dell, if Dell was in nets, the Sharks would have clearly won this game. I definitely can't say that. However, what I can say, with evidence from the past month or so where Jones just really hasn't been doing much of anything and Dell has been quite solid, I can say that Dell would have given the Sharks a better chance of winning this game. And so what does Bob Booner deciding to start Martin Jones tonight actually tell us about the Sharks' chances? Because I have no doubts that if the Sharks were maybe just 2 or 3 points out of a playoff spot going into tonight's game against the Canucks, Aaron Dell would get the start, and he would probably get the start in the following game, and maybe even the game after that as well. But I guess considering the Sharks are 9 points out, maybe Booner doesn't necessarily have 100% faith in the Sharks to be able to make that push, because you take a look at the contract situation. Aaron Dell is here for the rest of this year, but it's a toss-up whether or not he'd actually come back. Maybe with his improving performance, the Sharks might give him a 1-year deal, but again, up in the air. But with Martin Jones, he's got multiple years left on his contract. He will be back with the Sharks unless some major trade happens in the offseason, which will be difficult considering how Jones has played this year and even last year in the regular season. And so it seems as though you're trying to find Martin Jones's game back. This is the sign of a team that sort of has given up on a playoff spot and is sort of just trying to work things out in the last 30 games, which is not what I thought the Sharks would try and do in this situation. I really thought they'd at least make the push up into the trade deadline and see where they are from there and reevaluate at that time in those last 20 games. But instead, Jones gets the start here tonight, and it doesn't end up working out, and now maybe we should see some more of Martin Jones, because this is a tough loss to take at this point. Next, I will talk about Tomas Hertl, as I said, he scored a goal in this game, but he would eventually leave with an injury. Now, it doesn't seem to be particularly serious, as he ends up going down with an injury, going to the dressing room, but he eventually returns to try and see, how it feels before he does eventually leave for the rest of the game. And so it's certainly not at the levels of Logan Couture, 6 weeks out minimum, but we could maybe miss Hertl for a couple of games. Now, it is possible that, again, if the Sharks actually were deep in the playoff race, maybe Hertl never actually leaves this game. But it could be another situation of you start Jones, you let Hertl sit because you're not all that desperate, and that's a bit disappointing to see, but maybe it's probably a better idea to just rest Hertl for this. However, now if Hertl is out of the lineup, we go into the next game. There's no Couture, there's no Hertl. You have Joe Thornton as your top line center, which is not something you probably wanted to say. Maybe it was something you wanted to say 4 or 5 years ago, but not at this point in his career. And your second line center is Dylan Gambrell, which isn't really the best thing to have. And so the Sharks, a team already pretty weak offensively, are now missing their top 2 centers. It's going to be tough, especially going up against a very good Tampa Bay Lightning team next. And finally, I'll talk about Timo Meier. When Couture did go down with injury, I said Hertl, Meier, and Kane, the 3 top 6 forwards for the San Jose Sharks, really needed to step up in his absence. Now with Hertl potentially out for at least a game or 2, if that, it's going to have to be Meier and Kane stepping up. And just in the rest of this game against the Canucks where Hertl was gone, I thought Meier actually played very, very well. You can sort of tell when Meier is on his game compared to when he's off his game. When Meier is off his game, he sort of reverts back to where he was maybe closer to his rookie year, where he sort of just fires shots on net that have a very, very low percentage chance of going in. But when Meier is on his game, you could really tell that he gets on top of protecting the puck and trying to actually set up his own plays and make things happen, which is a lot nicer to see. It's not something we've seen a lot of from Timo Meier this season, but it was something that we did see at least in the first couple periods here against the Canucks. I also thought Evander Kane, even though he's not written here, also had a pretty solid game. So as I said, if Hertl's not there for the following one and the Sharks still want to be able to win, Meier and Kane will have to have some pretty strong performances. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday. As I said, they will be I believe it's hosting the Tampa Bay Lightning. Their previous game against the Lightning, their only other game against the Lightning this season, did not go particularly well, as they ended up losing that one 7-1. So it's going to be difficult to have a worse performance than that. But if the Sharks do still want some playoff aspirations, that's more or less a must-win, especially when you consider this loss here to the Canucks tonight. Class dismissed.